G'day mates, it's Busta here. So, as I'm sure that all of you are well aware by now, the YouTube adpocalypse has hit the wallets of many content creators, and none more so than the horror community here on YouTube. As such, the money I'm now earning from YouTube ad revenue is no longer enough for me to survive on. And while this has been distressing for me and others, this doesn't need to be the end of my channel or horror on YouTube. You can keep YouTube creepy and keep my channel operating by pledging as little as $1 a month on Patreon. It's really simple, guys. All you have to do is go on my Patreon account, which is in the description below, and pledge as much or as little as you wish. And as a way of giving back to you guys, if the show can become fully fan-funded, I will remove all mid-roll ads from all of my YouTube videos. Also, to be completely transparent, currently I'm averaging about $300 to $400 a week on Patreon, which is getting really close to sustainability. I need roughly about $700 to $800 a week to pay all of my bills and look after my family and everything, which means we're about halfway to becoming completely independent from YouTube. So if only 400 more of you gave $1 a month, that would put me in a place where I no longer need to be concerned about what YouTube is doing anymore, which in the current climate would be awesome. So if you have $1 or $2 to spare, please consider making a pledge today. And thank you to all those who have already pledged and who will pledge. Your support right now has kept the lights on for me and my family, and I appreciate all of you very much. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoy the video, and without further ado, let's begin. A few years ago, I went to New Orleans on vacation with my then boyfriend. We stayed at this really cute bed and breakfast just outside of the French Quarter, which was 2 mansions across the street from each other that were converted. On the first night, we were lying in bed watching television after a long day, when suddenly, violent punching from beneath the mattress made us both leap out of bed. The punching was strong enough that the mattress undulated where the punching was coming from, and repeated enough times for me to not think it was a spring. After taking a moment to calm down, we both checked under the bed. Nothing. We eventually went back to bed, but didn't sleep much that night. On the second night, my boyfriend woke up at around 4 AM to see someone or something he thought was me exit the restroom and make their or its way to the bed. He followed the figure through the room, and as it approached the bed, he realized that I was sleeping next to him. Petrified, my boyfriend just kept staring at the figure until it just faded away, and then he woke me up in a panic. There were other strange things that happened in that room too. Doors would open and close by themselves. Things would be in different places in the morning than where we left them before going to bed. We would hear footsteps coming from the room above us, even though nobody was checked into that room or the room next to it. And there were also voices in the room. We were only there for 4 to 5 days, but it was terrifying, and we weren't the only guest to experience things. Over breakfast one morning, I overheard another guest tell the manager about what was going on in her room. The manager just replied with, "This is New Orleans, honey." It was a really creepy but interesting place. I would actually like to go back someday. The house I grew up in had a lot of history. I found an old book about the county's founding in our local library one day. When I was leafing through it, I found a picture of my house. It didn't have the porch or the kitchen addition built yet, but it was otherwise identical, and the address was the same. The caption inside read, "Built in the late 1850s. The residence at the corner of current cross street names originally served as a hospital for the entire county and the local railway workers." After another few chapters, I saw a picture of our tiny village's main street up in flames. It said, "The Great Town Fire." I forget the year, but apparently most of the town got caught in the fire, but my house was spared. So this was a weird place to live. The foundation was sinking in 2 different sinkholes, so the middle of the house came to a peak. To call the basement unfinished was giving it too much credit. It was basically an enormous root cellar that looked sort of like the end scene of the Blair Witch Project. There were lots of little rooms with small doors. The doors were rusted metal with jagged holes that once held enormous locks that had since been removed. In the upstairs bathroom, there was this old window from before the kitchen was added on. It was really close to the floor. If you looked inside, there was a sort of crawl space, and you could see the wooden beams that were used to build the kitchen there, and they were stamped with the year 1909. My brother's room had 3 different entrances, and was long and narrow with this ancient yellow tile in it. We decided it must have been where the patients' beds had gone when the house was still functioning as a hospital. My bedroom closet was really tall and narrow, with bizarre proportions. It was probably only 5 feet wide and 5 feet deep square, but the ceiling was around 12 feet tall. There were no hanging rods or hooks or anything you would expect in a closet. Just a tiny bench that was only a few inches off the floor and built into the wall. The closet door had a huge lock that could only be used with one of those old skeleton keys. We had so many weird occurrences in that place, we stopped paying attention. The doors would open and close on their own, not just the occasional creak from the wind either. They would open and slam closed repeatedly, over and over again. It wouldn't stop until you put something heavy in front of them. We all had bricks and other heavy objects in our rooms to barricade the doors when they decided to go nuts like this. A couple of times, I would be about to fall asleep and I would feel a hand lift my hair off of my forehead in a sort of nurturing gesture. I would sit straight up and find that I was still alone. Most of these occurrences could be brushed off as weird old house stuff or a dozing dream, but there was one thing that really stood out as being inexplicable. My dad was a true bastard of a man. He was an evil drunk that would stumble up the stairs in the middle of the night to scream his head off at us kids over some nonsense. My brother's room was at the top of the stairs, so he would be the first visit on these tirades. So, sometimes he would camp out on my floor so we could have some warning that the asshole was incoming. My dad had this really pronounced limp from an alcohol-induced car accident, so you could really hear this guy coming. His stomping gait, combined with the creaks and the groans of the old house, always let you know that he was on his way. That night, my brother was sleeping on my floor. He got woken up by his door going bonkers, so he had asked to stay in my room for the night. It was only a few minutes after we turned off the lights that we then heard the first clattering footfall on the stairs. We both looked at each other and steeled ourselves. We heard the thudding pair of feet hit each and every step. You could hear each step creak and sag from the weight of the person standing on them. The landing at the top of the stairs always creaked especially loud since the floorboards were so old. But when the footsteps reached the last stair, we didn't hear anything. We waited, and it was only silence. No creak of the landing, no noises of someone going back down the stairs. Eventually I got brave and peeked around the corner, and there was no one there. Our dad wasn't even home yet. As I walked back to tell my brother, my bedroom door slammed right in front of me. I did not miss that house for so many reasons. My brother and I are now grown, and he still brings it up with a shudder. This happened about a year ago, during the summer. I work at a local family-owned grocery store that has its own package store. With a package store comes a bottle return room, and ours is particularly small, with only 2 machines that, may I add, jam and break fairly easily. We're located next to a gas station convenience store, so we get our fair share of strange, creepy men who love to make young women feel uncomfortable and purposely break our bottle machines so the girls have to fix them as they watch. We also get a handful of regulars since we're a local shop, and unfortunately, many of our regulars are those creepy, perverted men. Our bottle room is where this story starts. It was a Saturday night, around 8 o'clock. We close at 10 on Saturdays, so although it was summer, it was dark outside once we left work. One of our regulars, I'll call him Jim, came in to return some bottles. Jim is slightly older, probably in his 50s. He's a short man who smelled of sweat and beer and loved to sing while returning his bottles. He didn't seem to be as creepy as most of the other men that came in, but I was always cautious around him. Naturally, my co-worker, I'll call him Nick, and I got a call at the registers letting us know that the bottle machines were jammed. Nick volunteered to go and jam the machine since he knew who was behind the call. Nick comes back to the front after a few minutes and everything is completely normal. He helps a few customers out and waits to see if Jim will come to the front before telling me that he was going to fill the milk and eggshells in the cooler. It was protocol for closing the store. It doesn't take too long to restock the milk and the eggs, maybe 10 minutes on a night where the shelves are very empty, but Nick came back within about 2 minutes. After ringing up another customer, he told me, "Hey, Jim was asking to see you, personally, so just a heads up." Despite the gross feeling that gave me, it wasn't out of the ordinary for Jim to say that. Nick cleared his line through though, and then said quickly, "Oh, and he had a machete, so there's that too." Now, weird shit going down in the bottle room isn't unusual, but I can say that I have never seen or even heard of a customer carrying a machete in any store. I suggested that we call the police, but Nick told me that he wasn't threatening anyone with it. He was putting it back in his backpack, so the cops probably wouldn't do much. I shrug it off for the most part, as I trusted Nick, but still keep it in the back of my head to watch out for Jim. 10 or 15 minutes go by and there was no sign of Jim anywhere, so I figured that it was safe for me to assume that he had left and would redeem his bottle slip another time. The next hour and a half goes by smoothly, and we're getting ready to close our registers and lock our doors, when I see someone run by the floor to the ceiling windows at the front of the building, which is behind our registers, so while I'm working on the register, my back is to the windows. I shrug it off again, but I'm still wary, and decided to keep myself on high alert and return to my closing business. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the same person run by the sliding doors to my left, tripping the motion sensor, causing the doors to open. This time, I recognize the person as Jim. At this point, I am getting slightly nervous and tell Nick that it was close enough to 10 PM for him to lock up. He goes and locks the doors and I see Jim run by again, totally ignoring Nick. We finish closing and Nick shuts all the lights off, but I tell him not to leave yet because I was feeling even more nervous about Jim running around outside. As a side note, Jim wasn't just leisurely going for a run around the store. He was pacing, almost like he was circling our store, waiting for us to come out. I let Nick know that I was very unnerved by this, especially since I hadn't driven to work that night and my mother wasn't there to pick me up. He said it would be okay from inside of the store and we just needed to wait it out. We were waiting in the aisles of the store, watching Jim closely, when I noticed a gleam of light reflecting off something in his hand. It was his machete. I texted my mum to tell her to park right in front of the back door so I could jump straight into a car when she got there. When Nick and I deemed it safe enough to leave, we took the opportunity and booked it out of there. I saw Jim at the front of the store as my mum and I drove off, and I can definitely say that that event sticks out to me as the most unsafe I've felt at work. I can't tell you why I didn't call the police. I guess I just trusted Nick enough to also trust his word against calling them. But looking back, I think it was dumb of us not to call them. Some things to add to this story was that I was a 17-year-old girl at the time of this event, and knowing that Jim was asking for me personally, that situation had the potential to get a whole lot worse, especially since we decided not to call the police. I also don't know the laws for carrying weapons in my town that I live in, or at my place of work, so I'm not sure if it was legal to have it on the property of the store or not, let alone carry it. All I can say is that I'm glad I didn't walk out the back that day. A lot of this story is told from accounts other than my own, but there are also some of my own personal experiences too. When I was a teenager, maybe 16 or 17, I was living in a small town outside of Nashville, Tennessee. During the summer, I would spend nearly every day with my two best friends, Michael and Jimmy. Jimmy's mother, Amanda, had just remarried to a really nice guy named Matt, who treated them really well. Also, Matt was a very well-off music producer in Nashville. When they bought a new house, Matt went all out to convert the finished basement into a hangout for all of the kids. It was really awesome. There was a big screen TV with every game console you could imagine that was available at the time. Matt had also put about 5 twin beds in one section of the room for people to sleep over in. Now, it's important to understand that the basement was actually an exit to the backyard. The house was one of those houses where it looked like a 2-story home from the front, but 3 stories from the back. We spent hours down in that basement once all the moving was done. The first night they stayed in the house, Michael and I were invited to stay with them, and of course, we agreed. We were awake until past midnight, seeing as how it was summer vacation and we had nowhere to be in the morning. I fell asleep on the bed that was closest to the French doors that led to the backyard. I woke up at around 3 a.m. with a very strange feeling. When I looked up, I saw what I thought was Jimmy's little sister, Chelsea, sitting in front of the TV that was turned off. My eyesight being terrible and not having my glasses on, that was the only logical assumption that I came to. But when I said Chelsea's name, the little girl turned her head very slowly to look at me. As I said, I couldn't really see her face since the room was only lit by the dim moonlight, and I was not wearing my glasses. So I said, "Chelsea, come on, let's go back upstairs," and rolled over to get my glasses. But when I turned back around, she was gone. There was no sign of her, and I didn't hear her go upstairs. At the time, I didn't really think much of it, so I turned back around and just went back to sleep. And that was our first night of staying there. The very next morning, Amanda woke up to make breakfast for everyone. As I said before, the house's first floor was actually the second floor from the back of the house, so the kitchen looked down into the backyard. Amanda noticed that there was a little girl standing in a nightgown walking around the backyard. She assumed that this was one of the neighborhood girls that wanted to come over and play on the playground in the backyard, and didn't think much of it. She went back to cooking breakfast, but when she came back to the window, the little girl was gone. Right around this time, she sees Chelsea come out of the hallway from the bedrooms and walk into the living room. She starts to call her to see what she wants for breakfast, but gets no response. After asking a few times, she walked into the living room to see why she wouldn't answer, but the room was empty. She walked down the hall to Chelsea's room to see her sound asleep still. Amanda was confused, but she just assumed that she was half asleep still from the long day of moving the day before. She woke Chelsea up and asked her if she was hungry. Chelsea said yes and walked into the living room to play. Not too long after this, Amanda hears Chelsea talking in the next room and laughing. She comes into the living room to ask who she's talking to. Chelsea says, "I'm talking to my new friends." Amanda assumes that these are imaginary friends. She plays along and asks, "Oh, how many are there?" Chelsea says that there are 2 friends. "Are they little girls like you?" Amanda asked. Chelsea says, "One of them is. Her name is Layla. My other friend is older than us." "What is this older friend's name?" "Her name is..." And she said the name of Amanda's grandmother that had died nearly 30 years ago. Amanda started to get a little confused. Chelsea then said something that made her skin crawl. "But she says your name is not Mummy." "What do you mean, Chelsea?" "She says that your name is..." And Chelsea told Amanda a nickname that her grandmother had for her that no one had ever known. Amanda was now frozen, but Chelsea continued. "She says that she's worried about you because of the man in the house." Do you mean Matt?" No, she's talking about the other man in the house. Layla says that he's really mean." After hearing this, Amanda was terrified for many reasons and decided to tell Matt about her conversation with Chelsea. Matt, however, just brushed it off as the overactive imagination of their 4-year-old. After a few more weeks in the house, no one had any other incidents. But one night, Jimmy was at home by himself and downstairs in the basement playing video games when he heard Amanda call for him from upstairs. When he went upstairs though, he realized before even reaching the top that the entire house was pitch black. He called out for his mum, but there was no answer. He figured he'd just misheard and went back downstairs. A few minutes later though, he heard it again. This time, he ran up the stairs and turned on all the lights, screaming for his mum, but he still got no answer. He went into the kitchen and called his mother's cell phone to see where she was. She said that she had been at the store for the last half hour and hadn't been home since that afternoon. Jimmy was officially scared and asked her to come home. She rushed home hoping that there was no one in the house with her teenage son, but also hoping that there was a logical explanation for the sounds. After they reached the house and found no one, Amanda decided to tell Jimmy about her conversation with his sister a few weeks prior. Jimmy was very skeptical and even told me about it. And when I heard this, I could feel the goosebumps rise off of my arms. Then I told him about seeing what I thought was Chelsea in the basement until she just disappeared. Jimmy, though, still did not believe anything was more than our imagination and coincidences. Again, a few weeks went by without any incidences, until one afternoon when Amanda was at home by herself cleaning the house while the kids were out and Matt was at work. While she was cleaning out the closet under the stairs in the basement, she found an antique mirror that must have been left by the previous homeowners. She loved the mirror and wanted to mount it in Matt's and her room, so she took it out of the closet and leaned it up against the closet door. A little later, she decided to make herself some lunch and go watch TV on the big screen in the basement. She came down the stairs with a plate and a TV tray to eat on. She set the plate on the table in front of the mirror and set up the TV tray. When she turned back to get the plate, she looked up to see a little girl in the mirror that was standing right next to her on the other side of the chair. She whipped her head around to see that there was no one there, and then immediately looked back at the mirror to see no one there either. She stared at the mirror for a bit, and then saw something move very quickly in front of it, after which the door to the closet shook really violently. She ran up the stairs and out of the house, where she called Matt and begged him to come home. When Matt got home and she told him what she had seen, he became really angry and told her that she needed to stop with all this ghost nonsense and get a grip on reality. Amanda refused to sleep in the house that night and stayed at a hotel with the kids. Matt was able to convince her to come home the next day, but that night would be the last night that they would stay in that house, and the last time I would ever set foot in it as well. Amanda came home with the kids and we spent the day at the house hanging out and playing video games. That evening, we went into the garage to see this beautiful old Camaro that Matt was restoring. While we were standing around watching Matt work on his car, I just completely passed out. I woke up with everyone standing around me on the ground while I was leaned up against a concrete wall with a huge headache and coke all over my clothes. When I asked what the hell happened, they all said that I fell over, started shaking uncontrollably, and then pushed myself up against the wall and started hitting the back of my head against it. Then Chelsea said something that, to this day, nearly 15 years later, makes my eyes water and the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She said, "The mean man threw you!" I jumped up and told Michael that we were leaving right that minute, and said that he had to drive me because I didn't want to be alone, even in a car. We sped off that property like our lives depended on it, and I never set foot in that house ever again. Later that week, we found out that Jimmy and his family had left the house in the middle of the night and never went back either. When I asked him why, he told me the final part of the story. He said that Matt woke up in the middle of the night to Amanda trying to wake him up. When he finally turned over to see what she was doing, he said that her face was blue and there was an obvious indentation in her abdomen as clear as day, with handprints around her neck, as if someone was sitting on her stomach and choking her. Matt started yelling and trying to help, and eventually it just was gone and she could breathe again. Matt and Amanda got the kids out of their beds and left the house and never went back. The last I heard, Matt had the home bulldozed to the ground, and even to this day, I have never set foot on that property again. This takes place a little over a year ago, some weekday around midnight in central Ohio. I want to preface this by saying I'm not particularly religious, nor do I necessarily believe in ghosts or supernatural things. But something weird happened that night that I can't explain. This story is 100% true, except for some certain details have been changed to keep some element of anonymity. So let's call it a Wednesday, as I don't quite remember what day it was, around 5 p.m. though. A friend tells me about an abandoned building a friend showed her the day before and asked if I wanted to go check it out sometime. Of course, I do, but being the curious soul that I am, I wanted to go that night, whereas she couldn't. I ask a few friends to make the journey with me, and all decline either because they aren't into the whole trespassing thing, or they are otherwise busy. I decided to go alone. This isn't something I usually do, as I have a few close friends who are just as experienced as I am in urbex, and the three of us are an excellent team when it comes to stuff like this. I've gone to places alone before, but never with this little research done on the area. I couldn't find anything on the internet about this place. In the end, I decided to say fuck it and go, as I'm not one to back down from an opportunity like this. So I grab my bag, flashlight, camera, and I'm on my way. I tell someone exactly where I'll be in case something happens, and to call the police if I stop responding for a few hours. I arrive about a mile from the location and start my journey. Most of it is woods and creeks, but the last bit is a dilapidated parking lot. I get to the lot and see not one, but two buildings to explore. This is turning out better than expected. I choose to go into the building on the left as it looks more easily accessible and start looking for a way in. Around the back, I find some metal stairs that have been overgrown and look like they're close to collapsing. I decided to take my chances and slowly climb them, keeping my eyes on each step to make sure I'm not going to fall through or anything. I climb the stairs just fine and get to the second floor. The door is closed, but opens just fine, no lock or anything. Looking around with my flashlight, this place is in better shape than a lot of abandoned buildings around my location. Part of the roof has been caved in from a tree falling, but everything else looks pretty good. I walk around the entrance room a bit more and realize where I am. There are note cards all over the floor with basic information on people, first and last names, address, date of birth, diagnosis code, and inpatient or outpatient with a check next to one. I'm in a psychiatrist's office. Nice. I love these kinds of places, and insane asylums are my favorite places to explore. I have a seat and look through some of the patient cards. I look up diagnosis codes and try to get a profile of who the person was. No particular reason, it was just interesting stuff. After a bit of this, I stand up and continue my journey. Now, the way this building is set up is basically a giant letter I with the entrance stairs I used at the bottom, and a boarded up main entrance in the center. The only set of stairs to the first floor are at the top of the I. I look around some of the second floor room and don't really see much. Mostly empty offices with a chair or a lamp in the room. I do, however, find a room that I assume was for children to play in while their parents were seeing a psychiatrist. It had a sandbox and some toys laying around, but I noticed someone took some of the sand and drew a pentagram on the floor with it. I chuckled. After seeing everything I needed to see on the second floor, I go down to the first floor. The stairs are steep and winding, but very sturdy. I check the door to make sure it won't lock behind me and make my way down. The first floor is basically just a long hallway with rooms along one side and a reception area on the other. I start checking out the rooms on the right side. After a few interesting rooms, break room, kitchen, storage closet with Christmas stuff inside, I come across this office with something interesting on the desk. But before getting to that, I want to pose a question. Why does every abandoned building have Christmas stuff in it? Like, seriously, 90% of the buildings I've been in have fake trees, wreaths, garland, or something like that. What gives? Anyway, so on the desk in this office is a set of post-it notes. On these notes are messages that make me feel a little bit uneasy. They go like this. He is planning on letting the hostage out, 4:30. Do we have staff accountability yet? 4:35. Can Officer John escort Jane out of the room? 4:42. These are some of the pictures of the notes. And this is where things got weird. As soon as I take the picture on my phone, the entire building starts shaking violently. My first thought was earthquake. Now, I'm not speaking from experience, but I have to assume that an old, dilapidated building isn't the type of place you want to be during an earthquake. So I start to make my way back out, only this time, rather briskly. As I get upstairs, I notice the door I propped open to keep from locking me down there was now only slightly ajar. The small piece of metal I propped it open with is nowhere to be seen, although I didn't look very hard. As I'm walking or jogging my way out through this gyrating building, I noticed that every door I had opened upstairs was now closed tight. What the hell? Was someone fucking with me? I didn't want to stick around to find out. As I was leaving the larger room I entered through, I noticed the door I came in was shut. I pulled on it, but nothing. The fucking thing wouldn't open. Now, I'm pretty calm under pressure, but this was beginning to be too much. I was starting to freak out a bit. I made the quick decision to force my way out. Typically, I hate doing any damage to a building that I'm exploring, and usually try to avoid it whenever possible. But this was a special case. I wanted to get the fuck out of there. I thought about it. Kick the door down? I've done it before, but this door didn't seem like it was going to go anywhere. It opens the other way and it was really sturdy. I guess I'm kicking at the pressboard covering the window next to it. Luckily, these windows were huge and low enough that I could get a foot on the wood. 2 kicks and the wood gives out. The building is still shaking, so I make a hasty getaway down the stairs. And then, the part that still spooks me was that as soon as my feet hit the ground from the last step, the building stopped shaking. Like, completely. In fact, everything around me was silent. I must have been going crazy or something. But I know what I felt and I know what I saw. Well, I got out of there and didn't look back. A few weeks later, my crew freed up and wanted me to show them the place, even after I told them this story. Oddly enough, every other time I've been there, nothing out of the ordinary has happened. I'm not sure what happened or why, and I'm not one to believe it was a ghost or anything. But I'd be lying if I said that it didn't shake me up a bit. Was it just a well-timed earthquake? Possibly, but I heard nothing about it on the news the next day, and nobody else said that they felt or heard anything. Any insight on this, whether it be spiritual, geological, or anything really, would be wonderful to know.